one thing that you're going to realize is when you shift identities, or we can say the ultimate, right, shifting, which is really the dissolution of identity altogether, what happens is the old identity will always try to creep in. And more so when dissolution takes place, like when the entire construct of identity takes place, then the ego is literally fighting for its survival. And when you realize this, very quickly you're going to understand, you're going to experience over and over again, oh my gosh, I was just in the clarity, or I just cleared this in the last moment, and it's happening again. It's going to continue like that. Like we call it the pendulum, right? It's swinging back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And what's so interesting is that in physics there's probably an explanation for this, right? The way matter works is that it takes a bit of time for those patterns, for the neural pathways in the brain, for the programming of the body, right, to actually occur, to actually be ingrained in the body and in the brain. And so, understandably, if you're trying to shift or change, it's going to take time. And if you're at a period in your life where you are ready, and the way that you know that you're ready is that the entire it's actually happening for you. Your entire mind is dissolving now, right? So your mind as you knew it, which is the amalgamation of every single identity, every single version of you up until this point, every version of your life. And life after that is never the same. They call it the end of all journeys. So when this ultimate identity, right, just starts to dissolve, that's really when you start going from identity to presence. And this shift, right, this swing occurs every single moment. And it can be a very disorienting, terrifying, brutal, yet beautiful process. Because this shift, a lot of people just leave everything in their life. They leave every single distraction, right? They quit their jobs, they go into the Himalayas, or they seclude themselves in their bedroom for 4 years. However long it takes, the universe really, when this kind of event occurs in a person's life, the universe finds its way to fully and totally support them. It's really, really incredible. But what's actually happening is, for many of us at a very young age, we had significant trauma, or throughout our life we had significant trauma, or maybe there was a very traumatic event in our life, right? But chances are there's a collection of trauma that has occurred, right? So there's a very heavy identity now in the body, and that veil, or you can say the mask that maybe every average person wears. Some people have that mask so heavy that mask runs so deep, especially if you've had the mother wound. The mother wound is the deepest seated wound that a human being can carry. And so for one reason or another, a person will come to this process of ego death, which is mind death, which is the dissolution of the entire relationship with the mind and the person that we knew ourselves to be this whole time, like literally being alive, like in our lifetime. And so it's highly disorienting, because what you're going to find out is everything that's coming up, right, during this swinging process, right, every moment and memory from your life is going to come up. And not just a handful that you have recalled or you can recall, but millions, literally millions of things are going to come up right before your eyes. And you're going to be like, wow, even that too? And you're going to sense that there's pain carried in that moment that you thought was just like a fleeting, like, you didn't really care about it. But in this way, thousands of things come up. And this is the reason that this is really, like Marianne Williamson calls it, the dark night of the soul. And every culture, right, tribes all around the world probably, have a term for this kind of, occurrence in a human being's life, because it literally is the most sacred process and transition that a human being makes. Also the most difficult, truly, because your operating mechanism, what you knew, how you knew yourself to be, which was governed by the fear-based subconscious mind, right? So the psychological self that was built in here out of a need to survive, this whole operating mechanism gets a chance to heal, right? It's seen, it's felt, right? And it's looked at a million times before it leaves. And then change occurs, right? Your personality starts to change. You start to change, right? And then in later phases, after a significant amount of work, is done, maybe years, right? Because again, this rewiring and reprogramming of the brain, it takes time. It's a very slow process. But at the same time, significant progress can occur in just a moment. And when you're going through this process, what you realize is everything is just about now, right? The mind will try to take you to the future, right? It will try to take you, to accomplishing something. It's going to mimic this whole process, right? And you have to be like extremely careful of that, because that's one of the really difficult traps that a lot of human beings fall into on this process, is that the mind takes the shape. It takes the shape of the seeker. It takes the shape of you. And so it's mimicking you literally, and whatever you consume, right? It's eating. It's actually like eating that thing and then using it and mimicking you. And the reason that I say this, why it's such a trap, is because when you don't realize that you have been identifying with the mind as the identity until it pulls away from you enough. And this process is, you can imagine, highly disorienting, because if you're the one in one moment that thinks you're the one having a thought, and then in the next moment, right, there's enough distance to say, like, for example, I am kind, right? For in the next moment, if there's a thought that, if you're the one thinking that thought, it feels like you're the one thinking that thought. In the next moment, it feels like there's enough space. And now you see the thought arise where it, like, energetically, it actually feels like it's still you, but there's like a delay enough where you're like, oh my God, it's not me, right? It's like enough space for the thought, I'm kind. Or it could be any kind of thought, right? Like, I have to go to the grocery store, or it's any kind of I thought, any kind of I statement. And in this way, like, the entire actual commentary, the commentary of the mind begins to dissolve. And what you're actually going to experience in this process of just sitting, looking and reflecting, right, on your mind, what you're actually going to realize and experience is that all thought has its root in the specific way that your subconscious mind learned how to fear. So there could be 4 or 5 really major patterns. And it's really those patterns that the mind, the gazillions of thoughts, right? The thousands of thoughts that we experience on a day, and the thoughts that we experience every moment during the day, 99% of those probably, right, are just, especially like the commentary here about like what's happening, all the characters in your life, all the personal stuff, what I got to do today, all that stuff, your entire human 3D world, right? When you're working, it's quite different, right? It's like the thought that occurs when we're working is more in the form of like subtle, it's conscious, that thought occurs in our conscious presence. And it's almost like that thought when we're working, it's like we have an idea. It's like literally a light bulb is flickered on. But the thought isn't like a visual, like rumination, or like an elaborate scenario, a vivid, like visual, very detailed scenario. So when we're working, right, or we're creating, thought occurs in a very different way. It's almost like a subtle recognition in a moment. But for the other 99% of our day, and the other 99% of the thoughts that we experience, what happens is the mind is actually the subconscious mind that is circulating and ruminating here and telling the story about everything, and the commentary that's happening about each person in our life, everything that we see, everywhere that we go, like the world, right? Our world is literally just our subconscious mind. And so when ego death occurs, when the ultimate dissolution of identity occurs, this entire world literally starts to dissolve. And if you can imagine just how disorienting that is, because every single moment you're experiencing thought. So if 99% of your thought is now gone, right? Of course, that's the most disorienting thing that you could experience. And of course, you would drop everything in your life. You would kind of have to, because the world as you know it, which is really your interpretation of it, but you've been believing it, but you didn't know that you were believing it until it comes up in front of your eyes and there's enough distance, and then eventually it leaves. And so either it comes up, right, it can arise, it can still play, and there's enough distance to actually see it, and it can still play, or it just leaves completely, right? But there's no longer this identification, so much at least, with the reality in here, which is you realize, oh my gosh, this is just my interpretation. And this is why, like so many of us human beings, every human being actually, or most human beings, I would say, go through this process of identification because it's the play of life. It's like the intended mistake. It's the veil of illusion, and it's the greatest secret known to mankind. It's just this identification of the mind. And so many of us, even from a young age, maybe we've experienced some kind of traumatic event in our life, and what happens is we don't actually have the tools to feel or process something properly. So what happens is our mind, in its best attempts to protect us, what it does is actually just it develops a coping mechanism, which could be anxiety, it could be OCD, it could be PTSD, it could be depression. It's just trying to cope with our reality. And so one of the things, that we learn from a very young age is really to suppress, more so is to suppress our feelings. And as children, we come into this world just naturally feeling everything, right? One moment we're laughing, next moment we're crying, next moment we're kicking our best friend or our brother, and the next moment we're hugging him, right? Or kissing him, telling him how much we love him. That is a natural progression of feeling for a human being. But what happens is somewhere between being the child and being the adult, something changes drastically, where now the adult doesn't allow the natural progression of emotion. They suppress on such a level that they don't feel fully. And what happens is when you don't feel an emotion fully, if you imagine going through your life right that, like even if you just imagine 4 or 5 moments straight, and what I just mentioned in a child's, for a child, right? Those same 4 or 5 moments, imagine an adult, right? Now going years of their life where they don't feel anything fully in the moment. There's so much energy that just becomes trapped, right? Emotion is really energy in motion. There's so much energy that just becomes trapped in the physical body that when this process of healing occurs or awakening occurs, so much of this energy really has to be moved out and is released. And it's quite painful because the body actually knows, right? What it knows by the time we become adults and suppress is that suppression is safe. That's what it knows, right? That's what it has come to know. And so to actually allow the release of all this energy, it takes quite a bit of time. And just helping the nervous system feel safe, helping the body feel safe in the new way of being that doesn't involve coping or involves less and less and less coping, right? So less coping of the mind, less coping in the form of thought, less and up until that point, there may have been, right, before you begin spiritual awakening, right, in your life, there may have been, vices or, addictions, right? There could have been an addiction to food or even like slight imbalances. Like, when I began my spiritual awakening, I didn't have like really heavy vices. My heavy vice was really people, my codependency on people, and emotionally my dependency on people. But there was there were imbalances though. There were imbalances and you could feel them energetically like leaving the body, right? Imbalances, with food, and they become more and more clear, right? Maybe it wasn't something so prominent, right? It's something so evident in your life before, right? But even subtle things start coming up, like subtle addictions, subtle relationships with sex, subtle relationships with, your phone, scrolling on your phone. And you actually realize there were addictions, right? Maybe they were just, they weren't as bad as like for it to be like a really big thing in my life, to really affect me on a grand scale. But the more you do this work, the more you actually become sensitive to subtler and subtler forms of, energy. And ultimately, all these addictions are worked out. These kind of funky relationships are really just energy that has been trapped in the body, that is sort of being manifested in a certain way. And so it's quite profound. It's so interesting to actually experience this. But when I had my awakening journey, like I remember experiencing like the energy that I had that was like a slight imbalance with food. It wasn't, it wasn't that much, but it was like a slight, I could tell like, there was one time before my awakening process happened where I literally ate like, I think like 11 bars of ice cream, right? Just because I couldn't stop, like something emotionally in me wanted to keep eating. And it didn't occur too much, right? But I could tell that there was something weird there. And so like even these subtle things just started working themselves out. Same thing with other things in our life. You'll realize, oh my gosh, like I literally have less sexual energy now, right? And you might actually think, oh my God, are you kidding me, Z? Like I want to keep my energy. And the fact of the matter is, when you actually release like these unhealthy forms, like what they are, they're in overabundance of these energies that sort of are manifesting this way. What you actually find is that your body is a lot lighter, a lot clearer, and you're more present. So actually when you are eating or when you are, being intimate or anything else, whatever that task or activity was where you cleared up so much energy, you actually find that you enjoy it even more. because it's a true kind of joy. It's not like a psychological addiction. Like, you know, whenever there's an imbalance in something, it's like the mind kind of takes over, and like this energy of the mind, energy in the brain kind of takes over, and you're not present anymore. You're now being run. You're now being like hijacked by something else. And so this process of awakening is so, I mean, like the fact that it clears out everything in your life, even like to the subtle like form of like, you know, scrolling, right? Like there's, for me now, like I could like literally I could be on, you know, Instagram for 30 seconds and sometimes I have to close it right away, like because I've just become so sensitive. I've become so in tune, like, and the more and more you do this work, the more and more your body is obviously is going to reject a lot of the things that like a lot of the imbalances that you have, right? You're just going to become fine-tuned and fine-tuned and fine-tuned as you become more sensitive. And literally human beings in our true nature, right? Your body doesn't like screens that much. Like a human body doesn't like looking at a screen that much. A human body doesn't like to overeat. A human body doesn't like you know, doesn't like to, you know, it's almost like these energetic imbalances that we have in our body are actually not natural, right? To a healthy human being, to like a natural human being. And so, and it's quite fascinating when you think about it, because sometimes you think like, you know, oh, you know, well, my relationship, you know, might change, or, you know, there's fear that's attached to it. And what you really need to know is that this process really is taking a hold of you. It's taking care of everything for you. And whatever fear comes up, it's literally only going to be the fear in the mind. And the mind has been it's been relying on these things, right, all your life. And so of course the question or the fear is underneath everything is, you know, who am I going to be without this thing? Even if you don't have that, your mind is not thinking in those specific words, right, in those specific terms, the kind of underlying fear is like, you know, who am I without these things, right? And so life really like kind of is, it's going to take care of that. You don't even have to have the courage, because now when you experience spiritual awakening, when you experience like the fundamental experience of what we are in this body, life sort of, it takes care, like it sort of like takes a hold of you. And up until now, like in your life, what you've been doing is you've been pursuing truth, right? You've been on a journey to be true, right? Of what truth is, right? For you. And then once you have the experience of our fundamental nature, what happens is it kind of turns around, right? And the truth starts pursuing you. And now there's a point where you're just, you know, you're swallowed, you know, in the lion's head. You're literally just sitting in the lion's head and you're like, oh my gosh, it's just, I can't move. I can't do anything. I can't turn back. I can't run, right? I'm literally being swallowed, you know, and this is what they say. I'm in the head of the lion, you know, as in, you know, I have been choicelessly surrendered. And when this happens, you know, when you realize that, oh my gosh, like I'm already on that journey, you know, and there's no turning back. And that's why life is so beautiful, because this will happen for you. And so, you know, many of us on this journey, you know, it takes such a long time to do this integration, right? This healing. And this process happens differently for every single human being. Although there are similarities, right? There can be a lot of similarities, right? The way that it happens from moment to moment is very different for every single human being. But in the sense of like looking, you know, questioning, right? You know, being present, right? As much as you can with whatever experience you're having in your body, right? Thought, feeling, sensation, emotion. And what you're actually going to experience is that the more you sit, the more you're actually going to experience that you're going to actually experience the reality of the identity that was you. And what you're going to experience is that the identity is the one that had the thoughts, feelings, sensations, and emotions, literally, because you're going to see now, because the more and more space there is, you're going to see the identity rise in the form of, you know, the thought that you know, a day ago or a month ago was thinking was you, right? But now that I thought is going to rise up over here, right? Or that thought is going to rise up over here. And with it, right? In that, like after that, like maybe split second or second delay, whatever time delay that is, right? The emotion is going to arise too with that thought. And you're going to be like, oh my gosh, there's going to be so much space, but the emotion is still going to arise in your body. And you're going to be like, what the heck? And you're going to actually see the entire identity's world actually includes emotion, right? Includes like the story and you know, all of that, but includes emotion and sensation in the body, which is so crazy, because there's a certain period of time where you're just allowing these things to sort of like they're almost like waves, and you're just like sitting there, you're like, oh my gosh, this totally wasn't me, but it feels like me. Like this is the story that like this story feels like me, like I could tell that, you know, I believe something like this, and on some level I still believe it, right? That's why it's still playing here. But the thing is, you don't actually have any control over what you believe or what you don't, because the root of the identity is now coming up, right? So as the root of the identity comes up, there's just a surrender, right? Everything, the entire world of the identity is now coming up and coming out. And so your job really just is to be, you know, just to be with the process as much as possible. And again, this is like, it's highly, highly disorienting. But you know by this point that God is with you, right? That you're like, God, you know, like I didn't bring myself here, you know, there's something, and it's not an intellectual thought or belief that you have, right? Your being is now consumed. It's now, that thing has taken a hold of your being and is now protecting you, and is now, it's like it's got you. So no matter how brutal or terrifying or mortifying, right, or how, you know, how scary it might be, how disorienting it might be, you still are, there's still something here that's calm, right? It's guiding you every single moment. It's like it's got you. And that's the best way to put it, because this stuff is not in the mind. And it's almost like the body has been restored enough in each moment to a state of calm, to a state of neutrality, in order to, like, to, you know, we can say have the courage, right? But what that is like the body is like okay enough to a point to actually be able to experience every new clarity or dissolving or disorienting thought, right? You're, whatever you experience in every moment, you will always be ready for that. It'll be just maybe at the threshold of what you can handle, but you'll be able to handle it. And life is so miraculous when this happens. And, you know, a lot of people don't, you know, understand this process. And even those who go through it don't understand it, because it's beyond the comprehension of the mind. And so one thing that you have to be really careful is your mind, what we mentioned before, your mind is going to mimic, it's going to mimic the seeker and the questioner, right? So if you try to look, if you try to reflect, right, it's sort of like a part of the mind develops to actually look at another part of the mind and sort of question it, right? Kind of like, you know, clear it out. Is it true? Is it not? But you think that you're this seeker identity, right? But really what it is, it's another identity that develops in the mind. And so in spirituality, they say, like, you know, when this job is done, right, it's like this thing will dissolve too, right? When this has cleared this out, this thing will go too. And it's sort of like this idea of, like, you know, picking, you know, if you have like a thorn, then the needle that you use to, you know, or like the splinter that you use to take out the, you know, the thorn, you at the end you throw away both. And so it's quite rough, you know, when this process actually happens, because it's another identity of the, it's another part of the mind that actually has to dissolve too. And that can be, that energy is even greater than the ego energy. And what you actually see in this entire process is that I was fine the entire way that I was, right? So this is the ego, right? This is the part that I was, you know, that was causing me so much suffering. And for one reason or another, we come to a point in our life where all we can do is just help ourselves, right? Help this part, like as in heal this part, look at this part. Maybe there's so much suffering, you know, maybe you reach a point where like nothing in your life is working and you just find yourself meditating. And so of course, you know, when you meditate, you're going to be intimate with your thoughts. You're actually going to be able to see them. The more you meditate, the more you're going to be able to see like all the thought patterns. You're going to be able to identify every single kind of thought here, right, as a limitation, right? You're actually, at least at the very least, you're going to be able to sense and feel that the thought is fear-based. And there's a famous physicist, I forget who it is, but he says all thought is a limitation. And truly, maybe you experience that, because the entire world here that is, you know, circulating here in the form of the highlight reel of everything that we experience, everywhere we go, every person that we speak to, everything that we have to do, this is what we call the ordinary human consciousness. What I got to pick up from the store, you know, what my mom said, what I got to wear, what that person's going to think about me, all of this stuff, right? It's my entire world. This entire world is actually, it's actually governed by the subconscious mind, and it actually is a subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind, we know, is fear-based. And because of its fear, what it does, it feels the need in order to cope with the fear of just being alive, maybe, right? Or our very specific wounding as a child, or not being seen the way that we were, right? Whatever fear that we uniquely have, right? And it could be said that every single human being has fear. Every single human being feels fear, right? And especially like, at a young age, when you're 2, 3 years old, and you stand in front of the mirror, and one minute you were just hiding behind your mom's leg, and the other minute you come out and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm not my mom, right? Like imagine like the shock and the great fear that starts to like infiltrate this little 2, 3-year-old human being. Like great fear, right? No coping mechanisms, right, at that time, right? But definitely not, right? So great fear starts to infiltrate the body, and then the first identification occurs, right? Right? So I am the body. And this is just the innocent, right, mistake that the mind makes, right? It's literally a form of protection. The mind is just helping you, right? And then so you believe I am the body, right? Even if you don't say it out loud, there's a belief that takes root here. And so you believe I am the body, and then I am 2 years old, and I am Jessica, and I am Muslim, and I am a girl, and I am Christian, or I am whatever, and I am a soccer player, I am a good student, I am smart, and all these kind of identifications start just piling on to the original I. And so at some point, maybe at 2 years old, whenever that first identification occurs, it's literally like it just becomes like this sort of storyline here. It's an identity that's now forming a storyline here. And when there's significant trauma in a child's life, especially let's say they're a deeply feeling child, because there have been connections between deeply feeling children and ADHD, it's no wonder that the greater the fear there is in the body, the greater the fear that a child feels, right? The stronger the coping mechanism would have to be. And so so if you have ADHD, what happens is it's the same thing. This entire commentary, right? The entire movie is just playing here all the time. But you realize that it's that original I, right? It's the I identity that is now having thoughts about its entire world. And what the whole magic of this, and the reason why they call it the greatest secret of all time, and the veil of illusion and all of that, you don't actually know that it isn't true to you until spiritual awakening, until this process in your life where your identity, as in who you knew your entire mind, starts to pull away from you. So you can imagine it's quite disorienting. But in one way, really, like the universe, definitely protects us during this time. And it's actually one of the most beautiful times in a human being's life, although it is the most difficult. And maybe there were other times in your life that were just extremely difficult, but you didn't have like the coping, like you could have even experienced like the loss of a parent, or your mother was very abusive or traumatic, right? Your relationship with your mother, but you don't actually it was just difficult for you, but you didn't have the tools to actually process it correctly. And because you didn't have the tools to process it correctly, what happened was you didn't feel that thing, right? And so it was just difficult for you. That's all it was. And maybe even then it wasn't difficult for you. Maybe like something in you, right, like the coping mechanism protected you. But as you do this work, this is when you feel for the first time, truly, you feel the brutality of life. You feel pain in such a way that you've never felt before, right? And then you also feel joy and peace in ways that you've never felt before. And the joy is completely different, because it's not being happy for a reason. It's not like I make that purchase and then I'm happy, and then you realize, oh my gosh, compared to like this joy, what I experienced before was just, it was like a very superficial, very shallow like joy. It was a very shallow happiness. It was happy for a reason. And then you realize, oh, I've actually never I've never felt happy. I've never like actually felt joy. Joy is quite different, I think, from happiness. And then same thing with peace. It was like before I had to meditate. I was always, I made sure I meditated every day for 30 minutes, right? So I could feel at peace, right? It's almost like I was chasing it all the time. But this awakening process in your life allows you to do the real work, where you actually return, your background becomes a state of peace, if you can imagine that. So there's going to come a period of time after you do a significant amount of this work, even if that's like, right? It could be, you could be sitting in isolation for a few years, right? 4 years, right? If you're like me, or you can be, but even in those 4 years, right? There could be a period of like a few months, right? Where you experience like deep, you've done so much work where, now you experience peace like you haven't had it before. And this is always happening. Our peace, right? Once you have the experience of your fundamental nature, which is utter peace, utter bliss, right? Like the ultimate peace, peace beyond the word or notion or recognition of peace, right? It just is. Once you have that experience, that has now, like, it's almost like that is the threshold for your being. And everything, right, everything that is not that is going to get rid, it's going to, your body is going to get rid of it. And so that peace that you maybe have been chasing all your life, you're actually going to actually experience what real peace is and what real joy is. And you're going to redefine every thought, idea, word, notion, everything that you've actually experienced in your life. And you're actually going to see, that the way that you were living before was like solely in your mind. And the things that you believed, right, the definitions that you gave to words and certain things that made up your whole identity in the world that you were living in, right, were kind of attached to like your identity, right? So like your identity, your personality kind of, identified itself as kind or emotionally intelligent. It had an entire world where it defined, itself using certain terms and concepts, but you didn't know that up until now, right? Psychologically, it was using these concepts, and the way that you know that is it gave them a very specific meaning. So it was for them or it was against them, right? And when you go through this awakening process, so much of that just neutralizes, like everything, sort of like words, like everything, the meaning that you gave before is just, everything's gone, right? And now, because when you go through this process, you look at things like a million times and you're like, oh, it could be this meaning, it could be that meaning, like, what was I thinking, up until now. You haven't been thinking, right? Or maybe you've been thinking, but you've been overthinking. You haven't been doing the right thinking, like the right kind of like clarification, process, the right kind of like looking and like actually sitting with your mind. And sometimes it takes a period of time to actually, even be clear on like what's actually, happening here, because there could be so many layers and just so much energy that actually the thoughts here aren't clear. It could just be like energetic, like, like just blockage, right? And you like feel like brain fog or something. And so, for me, when I began my awakening journey, I actually, the first year I simply, just meditate. I mean, I meditated all 4 years, but the first year I remember meditating, and there was just like such complex, like elaborate thoughts and stories here. And it was literally the second year when I, started to do like raw emotional work, and the scenarios, the very elaborate scenarios, calmed down to be just very raw, like one word statements of pain. Right, a little girl that was saying, she doesn't love me, or she doesn't care about me, or like, it's almost like the really painful things now came up, and it was like, it wasn't an elaborate movie anymore. It was just, it was like one statement, that I like, that carried so much pain, and it could have been a statement about that situation or about a specific situation. But it's almost like those elaborate stories, right? They were just the mind's way of coping. It's like, here's a vivid movie of like that thing that happened. It's like, it's interesting. The mind can really play in any way. And it doesn't even matter what that way is. It's just the more that your attention is up here, the more it's like you've coped with reality, the further you've become from reality, right? Like it's very innocent. And honestly, like these manifestations, you can't understand them. It's just whatever plays here by the mind, whatever neural pathways the brain has formed, whatever like you've learned in your life. It's just very, very random. You can't really understand it at all, but all you know is that it's just, this entire manifestation here is just a form of coping with life. It's a form of coping with reality and actually not being present. And so life really, is this return. And maybe you know that by this point, right? Maybe somewhere in your life you've come to like really, you came to learn that life is like, from going back, from living here to like living here. But this awakening process actually allows you to do that in your body, because up until now you've just been learning things, right? Your mind's been eating, right? And it's like all is like, you're an intellect, right? You're just an intellectual person who, understands and, knows a lot, but actually you actually don't truly know. Because when you truly know something, you become the evidence of that. And so that's what awakening really does. It really helps you embody all of the wisdom that you've learned in your life. And you could have been on a journey of like, pursuing wisdom and truth for like 12, 15 years before it happens. It just, there's really no recipe for it. But what awakening really helps you do is like everything that you've learned in your life, it helps you integrate, and it helps you actually become the very thing that that you wanted. And all the things that you learned in your life, it helps you become the actual result of the product of everything that you've learned in your life. It helps you actually be the evidence of that. And I hope this was helpful. And if you're going through this journey, leave a comment if you have any questions. We're all here to support each other, seriously. It's ultimately something you have to do alone, but having a community can be so helpful. And that's the case with anything in life. So we love you, and we wish you the best. Take care. God bless.